So I took a call from one of our insiders this past week, and his name is Mack, and he was freaking out. He was so excited because he had seen a dramatic change in his wife in week one. And I'll give you and I'll tell you a little bit about it because it was pretty interesting. He calls me up and he says, "Kyle, you're not going to believe this, but I came home today and my wife ran out the door at me." And I was real nervous because I thought, "Oh crap, something's gone really wrong, right?" But it wasn't that case. That wasn't the case at all. What had happened is that his wife had had a tremendous day because she had used the very first strategy in our insiders program, and she was excited. She had worked through a meltdown that day with her son, and she couldn't wait to tell her husband Mac what she had done and how well it had worked. So he was freaking out. He was so excited. And this is a guy, by the way, that prior to starting, he sent me an email and he said, I'm going to read it. "She's so frazzled right now, she won't believe anything could work." So she was in a state where she didn't really think there was any way to lower stress, any way to better manage the situation. So, to have a wife go from freaking out every day and you getting home, and this is what was happening to Mac. He was coming home to chaos every day, and his wife was just done. And these were his words. To him coming home, her running out the door and being excited about how she had handled the meltdown. So he was freaking out. He was really excited, and I had to tell him, "Slow down, Mac. There are going to be setbacks, right? This isn't the new normal." to steal a phrase that's kind of popular right now, this isn't the new normal. There are going to be days where she's tired, or she's still going to have those struggles, and you need to be conscious of that. I said, "But there is one thing you can do right now to really set this in for her." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, you need to go back when you have a few minutes to talk to her and ask her to share with you every detail of the experience." And he said, "Well, why do you want me to do that?" And I said, "Because I want you to help her relive it and refill that excitement." And I said, as she's talking about it, I want you to ask detailed questions. If she says, "Here's what he said," you could say, "What exactly did he say? What exactly did you do? How did that make you feel?" Right? Because you want her to refeel those things, and you want her to value her experience at a higher level. Hopefully that makes sense to you, right? So when I was a kid, my dad used to call it scratching the poison ivy, right? I'll never forget one time I was playing baseball, and I was hitting grounders to the infielders, and they were taking batting practice before the game. And they had a big screen made out of fencing, metal fencing, that when you hit grounders to the infielders, you could avoid getting hit by line drives that are guys doing batting practice. Now, hopefully I've explained that well, but if you've ever been to a Major League Baseball game, you know what I'm talking about. And I didn't like standing behind that screen because it wasn't like where I like to hit grounders. And my dad said, "You know what, Kyle, if you need to stand behind that screen, you're going to get whacked one day." And I said, "It's not going to happen. What are the chances I get hit by a batting practice line drive?" He said, "Well, it doesn't really matter what the chances are. What's going to happen is that when you get hit, it's going to be painful." And I said, "I'm not going to get hit." And he said, "Okay." And sure enough, a couple days later, I was hitting grounders, and I wasn't behind the metal fencing, and a guy hitting batting practice hit a line drive and hit me in the neck, and just up towards my shoulder and my neck. So it kind of hit my shoulder and bounced up and hit me in the chin, and it did some damage. It was painful, and it swelled up. It swelled up so bad that I had to miss that game that night, and I wasn't happy about it. And I mean, I was in so much pain. I had this big nasty crick. It was terribly uncomfortable. And I'll never forget what my dad did. He came over to me and said, "What happened?" He saw what happened. I said, "I got hit by a line drive." And he said, He said, "Does it hurt?" I said, "Yeah, it hurts." He said, You didn't get to play tonight?" I said, "No." He said, "How'd that make you feel, letting your team down?" I said, "It didn't make me feel good at all, Dad." He said, "I know, it's tough." He said, I imagine it's pretty painful, not only just not to get to play, because you love to play. You love to play. Of course I love to play. And you didn't get to play. I'm like, "I know I didn't get to play." And he was what he called scratching the poison ivy. Now, if you're from the South, you know what poison ivy is. I'm from the Dallas area. Poison ivy is this a leaf. It's a plant that if it touches your skin, it starts to itch. And if you scratch it, it starts to spread. And it spreads all over your body. And so what he was doing to me was he was scratching the poison ivy, right? I had had a bad experience because I had made a bad decision, and he was going to make sure that that decision and that really spread all over me, and I felt it as powerfully as I could. And so as I talked to Mac, that's what I wanted him to do, right? Is to talk to his wife and say, "What'd you do? How'd it go? What happened?" And let her re-experience it and say, "Oh my gosh, that's awesome," right? And enjoy that experience with her and let her feel that again, and let her set in, scratch the poison ivy so that she continues to feel that. So the next time she has a situation where she needs to use that strategy, she can use it and it can be a powerful strategy, right? Because she remembers, she relived it, and she really sets it in. And talk to her about how proud of her that that she was able to do that, right? So that the next time it happens, even if she's tired or if she's already had a bad day, whatever it is, that she'll really feel that strategy. And it was interesting because I told Mac, I said, now you need to temper this, right? Because there are going to be bad days. You're going to come home again one day, and there's going to be chaos, and then it's your turn to use that strategy to manage that situation in the best way possible. And I said, when you use that strategy, and she's involved in the chaos, you need to use that strategy, and when you manage it well, you need to scratch your own poison ivy, right? You need to relive that experience and say, I handled this as a father and as a husband in the best way possible. And it's interesting because it reminded me kind of a story that my dad told me when I was a kid. And I won't say kid, I was a young, just becoming a father. I had my second son, and both my first two sons were typical boys. And I remember I went to my dad one day and I said, you know what, Dad, what can I do to guarantee that I'll have good boys and they'll be well behaved and I'm doing the right things as a father to arm them with the things that they need to be successful in life? And he said something that he attributed to Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi was a coach of the Green Bay Packers, I guess, in the 60s. And he said, you know what, Kyle, Vince Lombardi once said, you can't guarantee you'll win a football game, but you can do everything you can to deserve to win the football game. Right? And at the time, it was a little confusing for me. So basically, he was saying to me, you can't guarantee your kid's going to turn out right, okay, but you can work so hard that you're gonna feel like you deserve to give them a fighting chance, right? And kids are going to make their own decisions at some point. But if you've done everything you can, then you can feel like you deserve that. And whether they make good decisions on their own or not it's in their court, as they're going to become men and they've got to make their own decisions at some point. And so as I was thinking about this, when the time came that we were struggling as a family, we had our first two sons who were normal, typical kids. And then our second two came along and things started dramatically changing our home. And there started to be a lot more stress. And my wife and I we just thought we'd lost all ability to parent. We didn't know at the time they were on the autism spectrum. And, once we learned they were, we realized we had to parent a little differently. And I personally had to do a lot of things a little differently. And so I can remember going to my dad one time and talking to him about my situation and the stress we were experiencing. And I said something I shouldn't have said. I said, you know what? I don't feel like I deserve this in my life. I don't feel like I deserve the chaos that I'm having to deal with. And he said, deserve is an interesting word. He said, do you remember what I told you about Vince Lombardi? And I said, yeah, you said that you can't guarantee anything, but you can work so that you deserve it. And he said, here's the question you got to ask yourself, Kyle. Have you been working to support your wife and your kids on the autism spectrum so hard that you deserve to have happiness in your life? And that kind of struck me as a little harsh at the time. But the reality was I hadn't. When I had my first two typical boys, I'd kind of read some parenting books. I'd applied some basic parenting strategies, my wife and I, and things were okay. But when my third and fourth son came along and none of the strategies worked and there was tremendous chaos, I think I was so deep in the chaos and so deep in the sometimes despair and discouragement that I wasn't working like I should. I wasn't working so hard that I deserved happiness and happiness in my family. And it was about that time that a friend told me about one of Michael Jordan's books, and I don't know which one it was, and I never read it. But his explanation of the book was pretty interesting to me. He said that when Michael Jordan came into the league, the NBA, he asked his coach, and I can't remember his coach's name now. I can picture him. You probably can too. But he asked his coach, he said, hey, what can I do to be a better player? And so his coach gave him a piece of advice, and that was his focus for the entire year. And at the end of the year, his first year, he was rookie of the year. He was, starting to become a star already. And so he went back to his coach at the beginning of year 2 and said, what can I do this year? And I don't know the pattern, but I know one year his coach said, well, you can become a better defender. And so he focused on being a better defender, and he was the defender of the year in the NBA that year. And that was year 2. And year 3 he came back and said, what can I do this year, coach? And his coach said, well, you need to be a better jump shooter. You need to practice jump shooting and maybe even a 3-point shot. So he went back, and entire year, he focused on becoming a better 3-point shooter. And the following year, he went back to his coach and said, what can I do now? And he started to stack these successes and really build himself to be a better and better player. And I might get this wrong, so you have to forgive me, but my friend told me that he kept going back, and his coach said, you need to be a better leader, you need to be better this, you need to be a better that. And throughout his first 7 years, apparently, his coach was giving him specific advice on things to do. I'm sorry, I think it was his first 6 years. And then in his 7th year, he went to his coach and said, okay, what am I focusing on this year? What am I going to spend all my focus on and solidify what area that I'm working on this year? And his coach said, I got nothing. You're the greatest player I've ever seen, and I think you're tremendous. And that was the year that Michael Jordan apparently won his first NBA title. And it got me to thinking about how, Michael Jordan, one of the greatest players ever, had really created a really serious focus and had created a path where he spent time on one specific thing and built himself to become the greatest player. And at that point is when all the pieces came together and he won his first NBA title. And we know that he went on to win 6 NBA titles. And so it got me to thinking about the fact that Michael Jordan didn't even deserve to win those titles until he had built himself into a new, better, more accomplished player. And I think that's what we need to do as men, is build ourselves into better, more accomplished men before we can really expect to deserve the happiness that we want in our families, before we can expect to deserve the happiness we want in our marriages. And so I'm going to challenge you, and this is what I told Mac, right? There are going to be setbacks. You don't deserve this yet. It's been 1 week, brother. You went from a chaotic family coming home to chaos in 1 week to coming home to happiness. But you don't deserve it yet, right? There's not been enough work put in by you or your wife. So don't have that expectation yet. Understand that it's a journey. The happiness that you want in your family is going to be a journey. And it's going to take time. And whether it's 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years, or 10 years, you're going to have to do the work. Now, the interesting thing is you're probably already working. You just might not be working on the right things. So hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully those stories and illustrations help you to understand and help Mac to understand. I told him I'd do a podcast, and he agreed to let me use his name, that it's not about one strategy that's going to change your family dramatically, right? It's about stacking lessons and stacking understanding so that you can become a better father and a husband, and your ability and your growth is going to spew is the word I like. It's going to filter throughout the rest of your family, through your wife and through your typical kids and through your kids on the spectrum. We've seen it in our family, and we've seen it in a lot of other families who've gone through our program. And Mac has had great success right off the bat. He's really excited about it, and I want him to keep that excitement, but I also want him to understand if there are setbacks, it is a journey. You don't go from coming home to chaos one day to thriving in chaos the next day. It just doesn't work like that. So, but if you're willing to put in the work, you can get the same results that I've gotten, and so many other fathers and husbands and families have gotten, and that I'm hoping that Mac will continue to work, and I think he will. So hopefully that's helpful. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.